Hey everybody, welcome to another season of the IAIB Spotlight. This is the show where we interview industry leaders, broadcasters, podcasters, anything that has to do with internet broadcasting. If you are involved in the business, we want to hear from you. We want to talk to you. We want to learn how you got started, how it's going for you, and everything in between. I'm Andrew Zarian, and this week, for the first episode for Season 2, I'm joined by someone that I know very well. You guys, if you watch a GFQ network, you probably know him too. If you follow us on the IAIB Facebook page or Twitter page, you know him as well. He has made a name for himself in the internet broadcasting community. He is a traditional broadcaster, came from terrestrial radio, went to XM, and made the move to internet broadcasting. I'm joined by Spencer Kobren from The Bold Truth. How you doing, Spence?
Hey man, how are you? I know you. What'd you say? You didn't say very well. You said something very funny. What was it? Very well.
Very well.
Yeah.
I haven't had my coffee. It's very early. I corrected myself though. That's what you do. I'm a professional.
I have someone waving to me in the studio. Okay, take care. Sorry about that.
I want to. We've spoken a lot about you and radio and the hair loss stuff and the Bold Truth, but I don't think a lot of people know how you transitioned into internet broadcasting and how you transitioned into radio. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get into radio?
Wow, that's a long, drawn out story, but I'll try to make it brief. I was published in 1998. I wrote my book in 97. I was lucky enough to sell The Bold Truth in 1998. And Simon & Schuster got me a little bit of press and some interviews through, local New York television and radio. I did a broadcast on WOR radio with Donna Hanover, who at the time was Rudy Giuliani's wife. I don't know if you remember this. This is, way back in the day, back in 1998. And she had me on the broadcast, obviously, to talk about the Bold Truth book. And to her surprise, her phones were ringing off the hook. Now, you have to understand that if you know anything about real radio, terrestrial radio, even if broadcasters are saying that they have, all their lines are lit, most of the time there's 2 or 3 lines lit. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been waiting on hold. Usually what happens is the producer, and again, this is a little trade secret, will press the busy button so that once they have 2 or 3 calls on the line, they will press the busy button so everyone thinks they're getting a busy signal, and, that's just the way that it works. They didn't have to press the busy button on this broadcast, and all the lines were lit. And initially, she was going to have me on for about 15 minutes, and she ended up having me on for the entire broadcast, which was 2 hours. So I kind of had an idea that what I had to say was of interest to people. Now, I knew that I did well with the book, but I figured, you know what, this spawned an idea. Like, why don't I try to do my own radio show? I have never done any broadcasting. I knew nothing about the world of radio. I was extremely naive when I entered the business.
But to kind of go backwards, were you growing up, you grew up in New York, legendary New York radio market, for talk radio especially. Were you a fan of radio growing up? Did you ever say, like, well, I could always, I could talk, I'm good at this, I could do this for a living?
Never. No, I mean, I liked radio, and I liked talk radio, and I remember growing up and listening to late-night talk radio. On Sunday nights, there's a guy on WPLJ radio, his name is Bill Ayers, and I think he's still alive. And I think every once in a while he's still on the air. And he was basically like an advice guy. He wasn't a therapist, he wasn't a clinical psychologist, but he would give really great advice to young people late at night, 12 midnight, on WPLJ radio. And I used to love listening to this guy. And I guess maybe there were some points when maybe I thought this would be a cool job, but I never really took it seriously. It wasn't something that I had planned on ever doing. Really, it was just spawned by this one experience on the air. And I realized when I was speaking to these people who were asking me questions about their hair loss, they had never kind of been, presented with the information the way that I presented it.
And I think even 98, it was still a time where you've kind of made it into this public thing where people are comfortable talking about it and going on camera and discussing it. But this is before the whole internet thing exploded, where anonymity was still a big deal. You did not want to go in front of people and say, I'm actually affected by this thing.
No, it was, it was pretty ballsy at the time. And I think that, I got a lot of for it, excuse my French. And, I was, made fun of in the media and by people in the media and by people in radio because I was admitting to something that really affected me. But I knew that there were millions of other guys just like me who felt the exact same way. And I thought that if I brought this to the table, then, I would be able to start this discussion. And I realized that not only with the book, but with that particular broadcast. So as soon as I knew, and I just saw the look on Donna Hanover's face, I knew that I had something. So it was really my goal to try to get myself on the air on a full-time basis.
So you go on her show, you talk about hair loss, you talk about the book. At this point, the book is selling really well. To
be honest with you, the book wasn't selling that well at first. I would say that most publishers do a piss poor job as far as promoting your book. Unless you are famous, unless it is slated to be a bestseller, even before it's in print, it will not be a bestseller. That's another little known secret in publishing.
So was it the radio show that helped sell the book?
It was the radio, me getting on the radio that made my book a bestseller.
Okay.
Period. And I really had a kind of a limited a time frame to make that happen. You have about 2 months, so about 60 days to get a book selling in bookstores. Otherwise, the bookstores drop that book.
And you're done. I mean, nobody's ever going to hear of it ever again.
Well, Amazon was in its infancy. And, while it was obviously picking up, you have to realize this was 1998. So brick and mortar houses were really still the way to go. So unless I did something, nothing would have happened. And I was on like Good Day New York and a lot of local stuff at the time, a hard copy and all kinds of shows across the country, small shows. But when you're dealing with the media, they don't really get what you do. They can't really drive home the importance of what I was doing, even though they found it interesting enough to pick up the story. Books were selling in dribs and drabs. There's no doubt about it. But, I had to make a move. And I kind of saw the picture and what I needed to do as far as to move my message forward and to, move my business forward was to get myself on the air. And that's what I decided to do.
We were talking off the air about the importance of television and how, what weighs a little bit more. Is it television? Is it print? Is it online? And we've always had this discussion where I still stand by the fact that even though print is dying and it really, to a lot of people, it means nothing, I could tell you, if you're in the New York Times, you're in a well-known paper, you kind of take that as a big deal. It still means something.
Sure.
For you to be on Good Day New York and hard copy, especially in 1998, did it help sell the book? Did it help get your name out there? Or really, maybe for, a couple days, there was some sort of buzz, and after that, it just totally died?
It gave me instant credibility in my industry. So first getting the book published by a major publisher did it, and then getting national press and notoriety. I will tell you the biggest bit of press that I got that really catapulted things for me was it was a full-page article in of all places, the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer is to this day the most read newspaper in the country. That article is what really put me on the map because it was that article that spawned so many of the other press opportunities that I had. So when people say, "Oh, he was, written about in the National Enquirer," don't take that lightly. If someone wants to interview you from the National Enquirer, take that gig because it could really help catapult your career.
No, listen, print is still alive. I mean, you're talking 15 years later, print is still going strong. I mean, yeah, they're not making the ad money, but to a lot of people, it still means something. We have an article, local paper, that's going to be writing on they're going to be writing an article on GFK Network. We're approaching 30 million live views. Now, to people in this business, it's not a tremendous milestone to hit. Live views, it can mean anything. But to these people, they heard someone say that we're getting 30 million live views. I think I spoke about it on the air a couple months ago. They want to write an article on us. And you know what? To people, it's still a big deal.
Listen, if you're able to say, as seen in the New York Times, 2020, 60 Minutes, well, I was never on 60 Minutes, but, on all these, major media outlets, I was on, CNN, CNBC, every major paper, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, having the ability to say that you were written about through these media outlets gives you significant credibility. If you look at people's websites, whether it's a physician or whomever, an attorney, one of the things that they really do try to promote, and sometimes I think it's done in a very tasteless way, is all the media that they've been involved in, all the press that has picked them up. Because in the consumer's eye, in the mainstream, in society's eye, if you are picked up by these media outlets, you are important. You have done something that has established yourself in your field that is better than somebody else. So you are looked at with instant credibility and respect. So it is still important and still helps. However, it's not necessary in this day and age if you really want to get your message out there. It's great if you can do it, but we live in a different world. We really do. And I don't know if you want to backtrack briefly to tell the story about how I got on the radio and then transition, because that was your initial question. We never really finished it.
Yeah, I want to go more into it, but let's talk about how you got into it. How did you did the interview and then you said, okay, I want to do this. Walk us through that process, because to many people, it's unheard of to say, okay, I want to do a radio show, and here it is. Here's a radio show, and you were on the air for over a decade.
Well, listen, the barrier to entry is it's a different world now. It is so much easier to get your message out there. And, when I see these young guys who are getting involved in internet broadcasting or want to somehow get their message out there, I think to myself, holy cow, if I had this opportunity back in the day, it would have been a completely different scenario for me. And I think that it would have been, so much easier to really do what I do. But back then, what I did was I initially spoke to the producer of the Donna Hanover show. And I was like, hey, listen, who do I speak to around here about getting myself a radio show? I didn't know anything about it. I was a kid. I was like your age, and I had no idea, no clue how to get this done. So she looked at me like I had two heads initially, and she said, well, you know what? You can speak to programming, but you might want to speak to sales, because they sell airtime for infomercials on this show, on the station on the weekends. And I'm like, well, I don't really have anything to sell, so I don't know if that will work out for me. But, I'll talk to whoever. So sales guy, she hooks me up with the sales guy. I tell the sales guy what I want to do. And the sales guy hooks me up with the program director. And the program director looks at me and basically says, if you're not selling, first he was asking me about, you're selling your books, right? I said, no, I'm not going to be selling anything. I just want to do a show on hair loss. And he laughed at me. He literally, he actually cracked up. And he said, look, how are you going to talk about hair loss week in and week out? How is that going to be possible? How much about hair loss do you have to say?
And what a different world we live in now. I mean, you could have a show on model planes,
That's right.
on the internet, and you'll have a gigantic following behind it. Or you could have a show on knitting. All these niche programming is what really sells ads now compared to what you get on the radio, where it's broad.
Absolutely. But, the thing is, I tried to explain to the program director that this really isn't niche, that, I'm looking at, he's balding. The sales guy was balding. I said, just about every middle-aged guy in this room is losing their hair. And 2/3 of guys by the age of 35 are going to be dealing with it. And 25% of hair loss sufferers are under the age of 21. I said, you may not understand the demographic, but whatever you think your demographics are, for each of your shows, I tap into all of them. And he basically just turned me away and said, look, we just can't help you, thanks but no thanks.
What station was this?
This was WOR radio in New York.
Okay.
So I then decided, now that I knew that you can, get on the air, buy airtime, no one's going to give me a chance. I went to different stations. No one wanted to give me the opportunity. I went to WABC and I said, listen, guys, just give me a half an hour on a Saturday or Sunday night, and I can make this work. I said, I can get the sponsors, whatever it is. So,
I mean, was it the fact that they have to invest time into promoting and to kind of give you the spot? Because
Exactly.
You know what? A lot of these stations, especially AM here in New York, you put it on like a Sunday or Saturday, they're playing like polka music. You know what I mean? Like there's really not much.
And I have to tell you, back then things changed. This is when radio was still radio, and they didn't really have to sell the airtime like they were selling it at the turn of the century. After 2000, 2001, 2002, everything started to go to shit, so they were selling more time. So they were very, selective on who they sold time to. They sold it to doctors, to guys who were had car shows, to people who were trying to sell a product or a service, so they knew that they were going to get paid at the end of the month. So to make a long story short, I said, how much is this going to cost? And they gave me, what they would normally charge. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I can come in here.
I mean, was it an absurd number? What kind of number are we talking about?
It was $1,000 an hour.
Okay.
I said, I can come in here and I could bring in enough revenue where we could split it, or I can just pay you what you want and we can move on. And he's like, look, I don't know how much, I mean, we're going to have, he wanted me to sign this paperwork, whatever. I said, you know what? I'll be back next week. So I got on the phone and I called some people in the industry and I said, listen, I'm starting this radio show. I basically said that it was on the air, that I got the green light. It's on WABC in New York. This is how much it's going to cost.
Major market, major station.
Yeah, I'm going to do 13 weeks. And all I'm asking for right now is half down. Everyone gave me the check. I walked in there with $30,000 and I said, basically, how much is this going to get me? The guys looked at me like, they couldn't believe it. So they gave me a 13-week trial. Got on the air, and the rest is history. And then within about 6 months, I was contacted by a local station here in Los Angeles, which was 97.1, the FM talk station. And it was a sales guy who had heard my show on the internet because they just started to stream some stuff on WABC and said, listen, I think it's great. He was a Baldwin guy. We'd love to have you on the air. And they offered to actually pay me $500 per show to syndicate the show, and then they would sell the time. So I thought, hey, man, this is it. Here's my shot.
Yeah.
Someone heard me, and they think that I'm worth something. And
how good was the show? I mean, actually, I shouldn't ask how good was the show, but how was the show then compared to now? How has it evolved from the original show, or is it pretty much still the same thing?
We got a hell of a lot more calls back then. I tell you, when I was on WABC, when it first started, it was nonstop calls. I had to rifle through them. I had no sidekick. Joe from Staten Island was my very first caller, which is hilarious. But there were weeks when he couldn't get through. So I had no relationship with the guy, but he would try to call. But it was really, the entire program was phone calls. And it was great. It was really amazing, and that lasted, for many years. And to make a long story short, got out here in Los Angeles. CBS was paying me $500 per show. They ended up selling to companies that I couldn't endorse. I went back to them and said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I will, buy the airtime. They charged me what they wanted to charge me. They didn't do any promotion for me because I was looked at as an infomercial. But I was able to control my destiny. And I brought it up to, at my highest point, I was in 30 markets across the country with the same business model on every FM talk station, including WJFK in D.C. and Detroit's 97.1 and Chicago and Miami and every, mostly CBS-owned stations, but some were like Salem Entertainment. I think it's Salem Entertainment and some other companies. And that's basically how the Bald Truth is born, and that's how it evolved.
Does that model still exist? Like, if right now, let's say one of our viewers, they want to take their show, they've been doing it on the internet, they want to go onto a radio station, they want to go on WABC. Can he walk into WABC and say, listen, I want to bring my radio show, I have an existing, show, how much are you going to charge me? Is it still like a realistic thing to do, or?
Now it's probably easier because they really are struggling. So they will try to accommodate whoever they can. The problem is really you have to be able to have enough credibility to really sell yourself and sell to sponsors. You have to understand back then stations were getting $50 for a 30-second spot on a Sunday night. I was able to command $1,500 for that same spot, and they just weren't able to do that because, radio is used to selling broad advertising. So say it's a men's show. They want to sell to, condom companies or whatever it is. Mine was very specific because the only people that I would endorse are people that were doing great work and that, I believed in. So if you heard a commercial on my broadcast from about a hair transplant surgeon or Propecia or whatever, it's because I endorsed those products. I believed in those products, and those products actually help people. So the consumer really saw that, and it was a lot more value for the sponsor to be connected to me.
And I mean, also in your case, you would be considered irresponsible if you started taking ads for, sham companies and you started selling it because people are listening to your show for advice on that specific topic.
Right, but it wouldn't have mattered. No one would have known. That's the thing. I could have done whatever it was. I think I told you that one large chain company offered me $3,000 per personal endorsement per market, and they wanted 2 personal endorsements per hour. So that was a $60,000 a week deal for a Sunday night broadcast, and I turned it down. And I brought this up many, many times over the years. Was that the best decision I've ever made? I don't know. My father and my family thought I was out of my mind at the time because I was a young guy.
But I mean, that's long term versus short term. I've had the same issue with GFQ where I've had a big paying ad for the short term. They want to come in, but I know it's going to affect the longevity of selling ads on the network because an advertiser might say, you know what, I don't want to be affiliated with that company.
Well, I thought that it was going to end up hindering book sales and everything else that I was, evolving. So I turned it down. But today, I think it's even easier. I really do. When I see these internet broadcasters, and I see the stuff that's going on, and we were discussing this, guys who are coming from terrestrial radio into internet broadcasting and they can't make a living. These are guys with names. I think to myself, how is that possible? You have the entire internet to generate revenue from.
It's a giant billboard. I mean, that's what the internet is.
That's what it is.
Yeah. You brought up that you were on the internet in 1998. What was it like then to have your show on the internet? I'm sure it was totally different than now.
Well, initially, it was like, people thought it was a joke. So I was probably one of the first guys to stream my show, and I was using a service, a company called the Surfer Network. They're still in existence. And they were streaming the program live through my website. I also had a
what
buddy
year was this?
This was 1998. No, I started to stream originally in 98 through a friend of mine. And then in 1999, I started to work with the Surfer Network. And so basically they would drop like this code on your computer in the station. It would be some sort of something you had to download from them. And they would stream a high quality stream onto my website, which was really awesome at the time because I was getting calls. I mean, I remember getting a call from Israel to WR when I was actually switched to WR radio from someone who was listening to the website. And back then, it was like that was unheard of. So radio back then really didn't take it seriously. So they were cool with me streaming from their station because they didn't think anybody was listening. They didn't think they were losing revenue. But within about 3 years, I was no longer able to stream the entire show if I wanted to stay on terrestrial radio.
They were telling you got to pull back because we're losing ads.
That's exactly right.
Radio took a weird turn they were not able to transition, in my opinion, to the internet age in time.
No, I agree. I think radio is there's a lot of issues. Listen, I would look at guys, guys would make fun of me for doing what I did. They would call my show an infomercial, even though I wasn't selling anything. These are guys in radio. And I would see them pull into the parking lot or whatever, and, whatever, car they were driving. And I know how much money they were earning and how hard they had to work and how much ass they had to kiss. And yeah, they were on-air talent. And then, but I would realize, Jesus, I mean, these guys are under so much, they have to work within the parameters of these assholes. Excuse my French. And, they're always worried about their job. They really have no control of their destiny. And to me, these guys who are well-known broadcasters were like working stiffs. These were the suckers, even though they looked at me like I was the guy that was buying airtime. So, Kobren has to pay to be on the radio. There's a famous Howard Stern segment that's out there that you listened to recently when my sidekick, Howard was apparently upset that someone called into my broadcast here in Los Angeles and claimed that she worked in his office in New York, in the same building, and would see him in the elevator, and that he allegedly was losing his hair. She called in to tell that story. I had no idea that this person was going to call in. Howard's people called. Gary actually called. Actually, Howard may have first, but then I know for sure Gary called the GP and the program director of KLSX and was like, "What the hell is going on here? Why is this guy saying that I'm bald?" And he was really pissed. So my guy called into his show, and Howard just kept going on and on about the fact that I had to pay for airtime to be on the radio, that I wasn't a real broadcaster, that it's an infomercial, and it's a stupid show and all that stuff. But, if it was so stupid, why are you listening to it?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, all these guys, not everyone is going to be Howard Stern and make the money Howard Stern makes. But most guys who are in broadcasting, most guys on the radio, they can make a decent living, but, they're always worried about their jobs. They're never going to make the money that an independent can make.
Well, what do you think of the state of talk radio now? I mean, it's virtually impossible for someone to kind of break through and to have the success of like an Opie and Anthony, a Tom Likas, a Howard. I mean, those days are almost gone at this point.
Well, I think, radio's changed. Obviously, tremendously. It's old technology. It's great technology. I think it's, I miss radio. I miss just being on the air without this, freaking camera and without, a chat room.
A laptop.
Right. And just, pressing a button, going on the air. I miss that. I miss that intimacy that you have with someone who's just listening to your voice, and the thousands of someone's, when they're just listening to your voice. But, this is evolution. This is where technology has taken us, and radio just never got it. And, the model of radio and the business of radio, to me, doesn't translate to this. And very few people are going to be able to make a living and be successful using that old revenue model.
That's something that you've always spoken about is how different ways of generating revenue. I mean, you don't need to stick to the live read model.
Not only you don't have to stick to the live read model, I'm not a fan of commercials in internet radio. Now, I understand that a lot of guys, including you, you do commercials in your show, and that's great. But I think that there are ways to draw people to resources that you can build around your show, and then let the advertisers utilize those resources that are out there 24 hours, 7 days a week that they can interact on themselves, as opposed to me just sitting there, reading some copy saying, hey, go to, Calabasas Toyota, to get a deal and say that you heard about them on the Bald Truth. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't think that the terrestrial guys that are crossing over really understand how much money you can make. You don't need, everyone's worried about numbers. You have 1 million listeners, and this is old school mentality. You don't need 1 million listeners to make $1 million a year. You can make $1 million a year with having 2,000 listeners that are loyal listeners that are going to use the products that you're promoting or services that you're promoting. And people just don't understand that.
And that's the advantage of having a niche show, and I've said that for a while. And something that I've learned over the last couple of years are most successful shows are the ones that are not broad. We have the free for all, which is crazy and zany, and we get nuts on that show and we take phone calls. But the shows that we do well with are the Bald Truth, for example, that's on the GFK. That show does really well. Why? Because it is targeting a specific group of people that are interested in everything that you're saying. And guess what? If I were to put ads on that, I'm not saying I am putting ads, but if I were to put ads, I know that the ads would be successful because it's targeting the exact person that they want.
Right. Absolutely. And, to get to GFQ, there's a reason why I decided to hook up with you guys. And it's really because I believe that what you were doing was really innovative. At the time, you had, and you still do, the best video out there. You were just doing fun shows, just basically a bunch of guys just hanging out. Yeah, you at the time you were not a big network at all. You've grown exponentially since I joined you guys. But I think that you were hungry, and you had really no air about you. You know, a lot of these guys who are starting out, who are trying to develop their own networks, I mean, they have this, this bizarre, I don't know, holier than thou attitude. And I don't know why, but that's just the way that it is. You were just like, listen, I'm ready to work. When we first spoke, you said, I like what you do. I'm ready to work. What is it going to take to get you on my network?
And then your lawyers called me.
Well, yeah, but it took us a year. But, and people even asked me, people in the industry, people in radio, when I said, yeah, I'm going to put my show on this kid's network, he's like, who is this kid? Why would you do that? Why would you take your content and give it to somebody else? And I explained that I wasn't giving it to somebody else, but, I thought that it was important to be attached to something that was growing.
I also
especially since I was transitioning from radio.
I talk to people about that all the time, and that's what actually one of the biggest questions that I get is, should I join this network? I've been doing a podcast for so-and-so. There's a network out there, and should I join it? They want me to go there. I have, this. I'm thinking about this. I don't know if they'll do this. And you know what I tell people? Unless and take me out of the equation. Forget about GFQ. Unless they are a major network, and I'm talking, Twit's a major network. There's Earwolf, that's a major network. Adam Carolla now has a network. These are major. Podcast One now is a major network. If it's Joe Schmo with no business model, I have no interest in joining that network. I wouldn't join it. The only forget about the whole making money from it. If I don't trust my content with them, I don't trust the how they're going to use it, I don't feel comfortable with it, there's no reason to join.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that, you're going to make your show what you make your show. It doesn't necessarily mean that, like with what we do, that I'm going to be distributing whatever content I want outside of GFQ, but you guys have the opportunity to have the program on the air, which, according to you, draws listeners, draws traffic to your website, and kind of gives you a unique show as part of your stable.
And listen, the show has kind of become part of internet broadcasting pop culture now. I mean, it's gotten, we're getting a little sidetracked, but Joe from Staten Island has become a figure in almost every show that I know, where people are playing his sound clips now.
It's ridiculous.
Isn't that insane? I mean, it's crazy. It's insane. But that's also the community aspect, which we'll get into. But to kind of go back to it, what point did you say you went to XM first of all, and you've told me that was a little weird too, because you would get phone calls from like truck drivers driving in the middle of nowhere. That was primarily the main audience for satellite radio.
I was also promised that there would be no commercials for anything hair related during my broadcast, and when I would take a break, they would run their spots. There would be like Avacor ads and stuff like that. It was just. And this had happened to me in terrestrial radio too. It's very difficult when you're in 30 markets. And I was at my peak to reconcile and to basically watch what's going on in every single market. But I would get calls from people and emails from people who would listen to my show in different markets and say, "Hey, this local hair transplant doctor is being sold during your show, being promoted during your show, or Avacor or whomever." These sales guys would snake the broadcast, even the broadcast that I was paying for, and they would try to sell spots under me, either around the show or instead of playing a station ID like they're supposed to, they play like a 10-second commercial for somebody.
Yeah,
it was wild. It was absolutely wild. So,
would you say it was a negative experience for you on satellite?
Well, this was on terrestrial as well.
Terrestrial, okay.
Satellite, nothing was negative. Everything was positive.
Because almost everybody that I know that was doing radio, they looked at satellite as the Holy Land. I mean, that was it. That's where they wanted to be. This is it for us. We're doing talk radio. We're not getting a chance on terrestrial radio. There are ads every 5 minutes. When satellite picks up, we're going to take our show there, and they're going to highlight all of us because they need content. And that is not what happened.
Well, listen, it was a great business model initially. It sounded good on paper. By the time they put up those satellites and by the time they got things started, the technology was already old.
I know they also ran out of money too. I mean,
right. The technology is already old. We don't need that. We have Bluetooth in our car. There's cars are getting Wi-Fi now. I mean, there's Stitcher radio and there's tune-in apps and all this stuff. Within a couple of years, all radios are going to have internet access. I mean, all car radios are going to have internet access, and we're going to have our choice to do what we want to listen to iTunes radio. We're going to listen to iTunes radio. That's the way that it is. So, to me, they are, dead men walking at this point, and they give people opportunities. But, I always looked at, I looked at it from an entrepreneurial point of view, as opposed to these prima donna broadcasters who would go in and, they're getting paid by these guys, and they feel like, oh, they're not getting treated right or whatever it is. Whoever is on the effing radio, and who, especially if you're getting paid to be on the radio, it is a gift. It's an opportunity just to sit in front of a mic and BS and make a living. So for anyone to complain, I think it's ludicrous. It really is. I mean, I've known there are guys out there that have had opportunities to go on satellite, and they screwed it up just by complaining. And now they're, out there in obscurity. So, no matter how bad it is for these guys, it's not that bad. We're not digging ditches here. And you also have to understand that I was never really considered kind of in the inner circle of broadcasting. I'm like the Rodney Dangerfield of radio. I never got any respect. I was always kind of like on the periphery of the industry, and I was always a weekend programmer. But for me, that was fine. For me, it worked.
But yeah, because you didn't go in there saying like, I want a morning show. You never. That's not how you went into it.
No, and like I said, it didn't make a difference. These guys, I see them in the parking lot, they get into their cars, whatever it is, and I get into my sports car, I only having to work once a week, and I'd go home and live a great life. It didn't make a difference. They can look at me any way they wanted to look at me, or they could, say whatever they needed to say. My listeners listened to me because I was on the radio. I utilized their call letters, their transmitters, their satellites to grow my business. Period. I wasn't on there for them. And to me, that's what was empowering. I didn't go on there and I didn't build their brand. I didn't build their, and thank them for a paycheck. I utilized their resources to build my brand. And I think very few people in broadcasting can say that. You have Ramsey.
Ramsey, first of all,
Liddy did it.
Ramsey's one of the top radio guys now, and that's how he did it. He was a pay-for-play guy.
There's a couple of what's her name? I forget her name, but she was a pay-per-play person as well. But and that's what people in radio don't understand. We didn't need the brick and mortar. We didn't need to worry about the transmitter or the license or the We used what you had. We used your credibility to build our credibility and to continue to build our credibility and to build our brand. And that's a very, very powerful thing that conventional broadcasters can never understand because they're not business people. You were asking me about Lycus earlier.
Yeah. Off the air, we were talking about it.
Yeah, off the air, you were talking about it. And I have to tell you that, Tom Lycus is a West Coast phenomenon. He is he has, and before I go on, this guy's forgotten more about broadcasting than I will ever know. I used to get such a kick, and his guy Dean J. D'Amelio, who is on the air with him now, worked with the Ball Truth for several years. Great guy. I used to get such a kick of being allowed to go into the control room with these guys and watch the Tom Lycus show. And Tom was always extremely gracious to me for allowing me to be a part of that because, in the eyes of radio, he was a real broadcaster. This guy made millions of dollars in mostly the West Coast markets, from what I understand. Very successful, funny, just good at what he does. I hear him now, and he's doing this thing online where you guys can check him out and blow me up, Tom. I think I should give him some props because he does a great job. And I'm looking at the business model. I'm seeing what he's doing, and I'm hearing that he's possibly having some trouble, kind of breaking even with his business model. And I think to myself, God, this guy is so good. He has such a great product, and at least at this stage, he hasn't been able to draw a salary or a profit, at least according to him. And to me, that just kind of speaks to the fact that broadcasters in general don't necessarily understand the business of broadcasting. And that's where you kind of I think, are ahead of the game. You've never been in radio. You've never been a broadcaster. You came out here, you put up you got behind a microphone. And, within a couple of years, you made money right away, but within a couple of years, you're making good money. You're able to draw a paycheck.
Yeah,
and you're your own boss.
Thing. Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't see it that way. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of factors come into it. Either they got to make, $100,000 a year starting out doing this, or they're not going to be able to survive.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the chat room. So is this Steven, Tech Buzz? Asking me a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Steve's asking, sorry,
yeah.
I'm having headphone issues here. You're echoing in my head. He says, Spencer, was it hard to work past the naysayers? I mean, after a while, did it take a toll?
It didn't, because I always felt confident in what I was doing. And everyone was a naysayer. Everyone. I mean, no one in radio, until I got off of radio, no one in radio really gave me respect. There were always the snickers. It didn't make a difference. I remember I was at a Kings game at the Staples Center. I was invited by the people over at KLSX to sit in the box. Tom Likas kind of made his entrance, and he was in there. But people would say, "Oh, you're the guy that does the bald show, right? How do you make money? I mean, what do you do? What do you sell?" It was the same shit.
Well, did everybody think you were selling some sort of product? I mean,
yes,
or they just couldn't work.
Everyone, all the talent thought that I was selling some sort of product. They never took the time to really listen to the broadcast. They thought that I was one person thought I was connected to the hair club. I mean, the whole thing was nuts. And it didn't make a difference to me. I'm sitting there with a drink in my hand. I'm invited into this skybox. I go down, get my car's my Mercedes is valeted. It didn't make a difference to me, because I understood that in my mind, they were the suckers, they were the working stiffs, and I was the guy that was out there kind of calling my own shots. So, forget about the naysayers. Stephen, if you're doing what you think is right as far as, you're evolving your career and you're able to make a living from it and you are happy with what you're doing, forget about what anybody says. It doesn't make a difference. People will laugh at you, for whatever, but you can laugh all the way to the bank if you're good at what you do.
Let's jump forward a little bit to you going online. You leave XM. You were still on XM and you were doing your show online. But how did you decide you're going to take your show to the next level and go on the internet?
Well, initially I had a camera. I had a producer at the time that said, "Hey, there's this website called Stickam, and why don't we just put a camera in the studio?" This is when I was at Westwood One, and see what happens. So we had this really cheap webcam.
Whose idea was it? Was it your idea? Was it like a producer's idea?
The producer told me that there's this website, you should check it out. Maybe we should figure something out. It would be great to kind of get the show out there. And I said, all right, let's do it. And that was it. And I put the camera in, and it was interesting. I had no relationship with the guys over at Stickam, but at the time they were relatively new, and I was in a real studio. So they put the Bald Show on the front page. And I'm seeing all these numbers. This is in the day when Stickam really had an audience.
Sure. Yeah.
And,
we were going head to head, actually, at the same time.
Yeah. And you were a young guy. You were like 20-something at the time. I was already 39, or I don't know. I was maybe 4. I don't remember how long. It was 2007. I was old. I was already in my 40s. So, it was odd to see that I'm getting all this traffic, all these people watching the show. It was a cam, just on the side of my head. But I think people just liked the idea that I was, doing a real radio show. And that really spawned everything. That kind of gave me the idea, if I leave XM, if I decide not to put this broadcast on the radio anymore, I still have an outlet. Now, I knew that I was going to lose a lot of my audience, but I wanted to evolve. But
you're going to pick up all new people as well. I mean, like you said, all you need is a couple phone calls, and it's going to fill up the show. Once people start calling, more and more people are going to want to call in. More and more people are going to want to, participate in the show.
What was interesting, when I left radio, my sidekick, who was with me for many years, left. I don't think that he believed that what I was going to do was ever going to get him to where he needed to be. So I was like, all right, dude, nice knowing you. And, Joe kind of became the honorary sidekick, because he would call in. And then what's interesting about the internet, what was interesting about Stickam is, I would get kind of like instant, feedback. And it was just amazing that I'm like, all these people like this guy. They love Joe from Staten Island. And even though people in the industry were like, this guy is boring and this guy is depressing, whatever it is, the consumer liked him. And I say the consumer because, to me, the listeners are consumers. The listeners are the people that are going to be buying the products and services that are wrapped around your broadcast, period. So to me, the consumer liked this guy. I don't care how depressing he is. I'm going to keep him on. And frankly, it gave me content when I was getting, just one phone call a show, or two phone calls a show. And then eventually, as he kind of developed his character, and he developed his character really, I think, on the internet more than the radio. Sadly, it's because he got more depressed, but he started to talk about the chicks with cranks aspect of his life, which I knew nothing about.
I mean, this guy, he became he's like your whack packer. Howard had whack packers. He's your whack packer.
Absolutely.
Now he's mine by proxy. I mean, now he's like my whack packer, and he follows, every show that we're doing. He goes into Stephen Haywood's show on the Tech Buzz. He'll go in the chat room and start chatting away. He knows nothing about technology, this guy.
It's wild.
And again, that has to do with the community, which I want to talk to you a little bit about.
Well, a lot of people will claim that he knows nothing about hair loss either, but that's another story.
That's a whole separate story. So you take your show away from the radio station, obviously. You're no longer on the radio. You're not syndicated on XM. You are doing it from your home studio. Now, you're not just on-air talent. You have to do, you're your producer, you're the engineer, you're the tech director. You gotta learn video. You gotta learn audio. Now you gotta learn how to use a computer. As far as editing goes, how is that for you? Because you're coming from, it's almost a different era. Even though you weren't, a morning guy, you were still showing up, doing your show, leaving. This concept of, Leslie Gold, the radio chick, put it perfectly one day. A lot of people have this idea, and she says the reason why a lot of radio guys are having a problem transitioning is because they're going into internet broadcasting with the 1982 mentality with broadcasting, and that's you show up, you do your show, you put your hand out, you get your paycheck, and you leave. You don't have to learn anything other than this button means on and this button means off. What was it like for you to kind of get away from that and to learn everything?
Well, first of all, I think that it was incredible for me, because you have to understand that I had to pay my staff. And it wasn't as though I just, paid a radio station and they gave me an engineer. I was doing the show from Westwood One Studios. I had to rent Westwood One Studios in order to self-syndicate my show across the country and on XM. So you pay for the studio time, and you also have to pay your own staff. So just that expense alone would be something that most independent broadcasters would have trouble, let alone buying airtime across the country. Not having to pay some of these monkeys that worked with me, who ran my boards, was one of the best things that I've ever done. And when I say monkeys, not that they were bad people. Well, a couple of guys were bad guys, but not that they were bad people. Just that you realize how easy it is to run your own board, and they make it like it's rocket science. Because if you don't know how to do it, it seems like it's a very complicated thing. But having the ability to control your own sound, having the ability to control every aspect of your program, including video, which eventually kind of becomes like anyone who does this, like Steven or like you, knows that it's kind of like it's like playing an instrument. You kind of learn how to do things, or driving a car. It's almost becomes subconscious.
Well, I mean, you're pressing buttons, but it becomes, this automatic thing where I know which button to press, and your mind does it without thinking at this point.
Yeah.
But it takes a while to get there.
Now, I want to excuse the fact that there's a phone ringing in the other room. I had to keep my door open because it's so hot in the studio, so that'll stop ringing in a second. But, to me, it was liberating. And now I have complete control over what I do. I don't have to depend on somebody to go in and do a voiceover. I don't have to depend on somebody to, and stuff that I don't talk about a lot on the air with you is, I've done a lot of voice work and when I say voice work, people in the industry want to use my voice on local commercials, in their market across the country. So, and also in Canada. So I've done a lot of commercial spots for hair transplant companies and, people that I'm willing to endorse. And I would always have to go into the studio. And, obviously I get paid for this, but, I would have to end up, renting the air time, the studio time and depend on some schmuck to edit this for me. And if it was wrong, I had to redo it. It was just a whole thing. So to try to answer your question, I know I've gone, it's been a roundabout way. It was liberating. It was the best thing I've ever done. And the fact that I kind of understand, and I still have problems with it because I'm a little old school, but the fact that I understand my equipment and how to, create my own sound and how to get my message out there, broadcast my message out there myself with nobody's help, it's amazing. And I think that is something that a lot of these traditional broadcasters, terrestrial radio guys who are coming into internet broadcasting, that's one of their biggest mistakes because they're paying staffs. They have a staff to run their show.
An editor, producer, yeah.
Editor, producer, call screener. I mean, I have to tell you again, and I love these guys, but he has a call screener. Now, Dino is the call screener. He's also an associate producer. He is a part of the Tom Leykis show, so he belongs there. And I understand why he would keep his staff. That's great. But, when I look at this guy's overhead, and I went to the studio, it's amazing, by the way. And I know that I'm rambling now, but I went to this guy's studio, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, to me, it's like, he gave a radio engineer a blank check.
And said, here you go. Buy whatever you want.
And when you're dealing with these guys, engineers that work at stations that, they're not spending their own money and they're just, they work at stations with all this top equipment, that's what they're going to end up getting you. You don't need that shit to do what we do. You just don't. It's fun to have it. You have an Axia, that's great. But honestly, and here's my cat, you could, you can run your sound and your program using an analog board.
It's totally. But listen, it's totally possible, and I tell people that all the time. You got to start small and work your way up. You don't need to go and buy a $2,000 setup. I know a lot of people out there push, buy this mic, buy that board. You need this, you need that. If you're a one-man show, you could get away with doing a $35 microphone, and that's it. That's all you got to do.
Especially if you're just doing audio.
I know someone. I recently spoke to someone. I got an email through the IAIB. 20-something years old. He came into some money, and he didn't know what to do, but he really liked radio, so he built himself a studio in his house. The kid spent about $5,000 building a studio. He got, stuff that I would never purchase, I would never use. He bought redundant backups, and he bought crazy stuff, everything high-end. He did this for 6 months, and he stopped.
Yeah.
He met a girl. She said, get a real job. And now he's sitting at home and he's trying to offload all this equipment and he's not going to get a fraction of what he paid. And I tell people, that is the wrong way to do it. You start small and you build yourself up and you see how it's going. You may hate it within a year. You may do this for a year and it's fun, and then all of a sudden it just stops and you're done. So what are you going to do?
Absolutely. I tell people that all the time.
You don't need the crazy stuff. I mean, and we have an Axia here in the studio, and Telos is a sponsor of ours. I tell people, if you want to spend a little bit, you have your mixer already, you have your microphone, you know what you buy a DBX 286 mic processor. That is the best thing I ever bought for my studio.
Look, I tell listen, I can go out there, I could purchase an Axia, I'd get a discount from Telos, and that would be great. But it's too complicated for me. I'm an old guy, I have trouble enough dealing with this analog stuff. Imagine if something goes wrong with the Axia. I don't want to have to worry.
Actually, you know what? I was the one who told you stay away from the digital stuff. It's too complicated. I've seen your setup, Spence. I think it would be really easy for you to do.
Okay,
I've changed my entire mind with that whole mix minus thing, and you would love it. I kind of want to jump forward a little bit because we're running out of time, but I want to talk to you about the community aspect, and that's something that does not really exist with terrestrial radio, and I'm not talking about, building a community around your show. I'm talking about the internet broadcasting community itself. How has that been for you? Because you came from radio, which everybody's separated. There's a wall between everybody.
Yeah.
And there's a hierarchy, obviously, where the top guys don't want to talk to the bottom guys, and it's a total competition where, God forbid, you're competing in the same time frame. You're automatically looked as the enemy. How has the community been for you? For me, this whole concept of competition is out the window. There's no such thing as competition for me on the internet. You can listen to my show at any time. I can listen to your show at any time. What is that like for you coming into this?
I think it's great. I think the fact that everyone's promoting each other, to me, everyone's on the same level. We're all doing the same thing. And you have to understand that no matter how long we've been doing this, this is still the cusp of this, medium. We are still at the very beginning of this evolution of this technology. And I would have to say that, guys like yourself, guys like Steven, guys like, what's his name? Mike Phillips. And, you guys are all pioneers in this field. You guys are all pioneers. You guys are all out there putting yourselves out there, doing your thing. And to me, it's amazing. The fact that we can all communicate. It doesn't make a difference if, you do 5 tech shows or whatever. There's room for everybody. And there's room for every genre. And I think everyone just, should just respect each other. And that's it. And I don't mind. And I think that's what's so important about the IAIB is having that sense of camaraderie and realizing that whoever's really involved in this, they are part of history. And I'm not just saying that to be dramatic. They are absolutely a part of history. This is broadcasting history right here. And for those naysayers and for the guys that don't really understand and for the guys who are still, holding on to terrestrial radio with a death grip, they're going to learn. This is the reality of the situation. We live in a very social, social media. We live in a very social time. Everything is interactive. Everyone is connected. So, it's either, get with the program or just die out. And I think that's happening to a lot of guys. And there are guys out there that are trying to get with the program, but they're bringing the old school mentality, the old revenue model to the internet. And most of those guys will lose. The terrestrial radio guys that were making $800,000-$900,000 a year or more, who have crossed over, who have lost their jobs and have crossed over, they will not make that money. Even if they're really popular in radio, they will not make that money. People are apathetic. They're not going to buy their podcast like they think they will. If someone thinks they have 200,000 unique visitors to their website and all they need to make is $2 per visitor, and they sell half, to half those visitors, they're going to make a fortune. It's not going to happen. Most people are lazy, and they want free broadcasting. That's what they want.
Now, what do you say about the guys like Adam Carolla and established people coming to podcasting and internet broadcasting? Do you think it hurts it for the little guy, or do you think it helps it? Because I get asked that question all the time, what I think about Adam and all these guys coming on board and starting to do a podcast. All these comics are doing it, and they're getting a lot of attention. A lot of people see that as a negative. How do you see that? Do you think it helps the industry?
I think it helps the industry. I think that anyone who wants to evolve their career and continue to earn, in entertainment or through media, they're going to use this technology. So if you're established already, it's a no-brainer. So you can't, you can't blame these guys for coming into this realm. It's not ours. It's not the small podcasters. It's technology for everybody to use. So everyone in real media is going to use this. And I say real media because that's what they consider themselves to be. And I guess that's what society considers them to be. They're going to utilize this technology. To me, it kind of just shines a brighter spotlight onto the possibility of being successful. And yes, they already have a modicum of success, or they have real success through the mainstream media, and they're kind of crossing over into this realm, and so that success could either grow or, they're always going to be noticed. And places like iTunes and tune in, and in all these places, they're going to feature the celebrities. That's just the way that it is. So can it bring people down a few notches who have been out there hustling, trying to make a podcast, and initially they were getting featured on these services? Absolutely. But the truth is, if you're good enough, podcasting and internet broadcasting, it's a democratic process. And eventually, if you're good enough and you figure out a way to get yourself out there, whether it's through the conventional means that you've been using through the internet, or just through Twitter or through your own website, you can be successful. So to answer your question, I don't think it's a threat. I think it's a good thing.
Same thing here. I tell people that all the time. It's bringing more eyeballs to podcasts. If someone's doing a tech show and I start searching for other tech shows, there's a good chance I'm going to find you. And we're still in the infancy. We're still 5 years away from cars having it inside, and to kind of the model has not been created yet, or I should say, a good model has not been created for the car. I think that is something that's missing right now.
And I agree 100%. But it's someone's working on it right now. So I mean, you don't have to worry about that. That's going to happen. I'm starting a new broadcast, and I tested the waters. I started last October. I tested the waters just to kind of see how people would react, and did not put a lot of effort into it initially. Just put up a Facebook page, Plastic Surgery Live, and now we're actually going to be rolling a lot of stuff out. But what I noticed is that if you can come up with a concept that could really be compelling to a small group of people, and we talked about this at the beginning, you can really build a big audience. And what I mean by that is, it has to be compelling to a sponsorship. It has to be compelling to people in an industry that are willing and want to be connected to what you do. And that's what starts the groundswell. Everyone usually starts with trying to build a listenership. And I have these many numbers and these many downloads. But if you try to work within your niche, and say you are, a tech person, and if you can find enough people who say, I want to be connected to so-and-so. So whether he gets good numbers or not, I'm going to build that. I'm going to keep that connection, and I'm going to stay on with him while he builds his audience. And I'm going to help him build his audience by using our social media to promote the fact that so-and-so endorses us. To me, that's how you really can grow quickly in this industry and make money. But I think everyone kind of initially looks for the eyeballs first, as opposed to kind of like getting people to help back you and to help make you grow. And I know it doesn't seem like it's an easy thing, but it's easier than most people realize. If you're good at what you do and you have some credibility in your field, then you can make that happen.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean,
right.
It's fascinating. I mean, because you could talk to 10 different people and they'll give you 10 different answers as to, what's the best way to do it? Should you build the audience first? I think it depends on what kind of ads you're doing. I mean, if you're trying to do, an ad like every other internet radio show, you know what? Then you might need the eyeballs.
And I agree. And listen, there's 1,000 people watching right now who are going to be watching this archive, and they're going to say that Kobren's an idiot. That's just the way that it is. That's the way the world goes around. But for me, and in my view, in order to be successful, I mean, not just people know who you are. I'm talking about financially successful as an independent internet broadcaster. You have to impress people who are willing to pay you. And there are different ways to make that happen. And it's not just with download numbers and whatever else is out there. I mean, I know that there's one guy out there that I guess there's a service now that you can see how many people are watching your live views, and it's kind of like they're trying to be like kind of like an Arbitron or some sort of like a rating service for internet broadcasters. That's great. You know what? But it doesn't necessarily mean that if you get these numbers, you're going to be able to keep your doors open.
Oh no, I know people that get 10 times the numbers that I'm getting, and they can't sell an ad.
Right.
And there's a lot to it. Like you said, a lot of people go into this not as a business person, but just as on air and going online. That doesn't really work. You have to be the producer, the engineer, the business guy, the sales guy. You got to be everything.
I do it. I do it all. I mean, I have people who work for me, but they work for me, on the business aspect of things that's really not connected to the show. I have all of the personal connections with all the people that have backed my broadcast over the years, and and that's it. That's the way that it works. People have to feel connected to you. And I think of one thing, and I know that we have to get off the air in a second. I think that one thing that people don't understand is they think that if they just do, say, and I use a tech show because a lot of people do tech shows. If they're just doing a tech show, then why wouldn't this company want to sponsor me? And this company, especially if it's well produced, you have to be relatable. Like in anything in life, people have to like you, and
that goes a long way.
It goes a long way, and you have to say, listen, you know what? I may not be Leo Laporte, but I have a pretty loyal audience of people that really like me. And if they can get a sense, if they like you too, then they're gonna give you a shot. Likability, relatability is so powerful, especially when you're independent like this, because you don't have anyone selling. You're selling yourself. And you could have 10 tech shows out there, but no one's going to be able to do a show like you, Andrew, or no one's going to be able to do a show like Steven. It's just, so I think there's room for everybody, even in the same niche. There's room for, many broadcasts.
Absolutely. And with that, we got to wrap it up, Spence. It's an hour.
All right.
It went by. I appreciate
it. It was great.
Yeah,
thank you.
I appreciate you coming on. Spencer Kobren on Twitter. You can follow him there. The Bald Truth every Tuesday on the GFK Network. Broadcast at 8 o'clock. Baldtruth.com is the website. Anything else you wanna plug, Spence?
No. I just want to say thanks for having me on, and I had a lot of fun. This is a great morning for me.
And we'll do it again.
All right,
everybody. Go to our website. iBroadcastNetwork.org is the website. You could sign up there. It's totally free. Great group of people there. We have blogs. We have news posts. We also have a phenomenal forum. Very active forum with a great group of people there. If you're a up-and-coming internet broadcaster, or if you've been doing this for a while and you just have a couple questions, you want to meet a couple people, you want to promote what you're doing, go to the forum on the IAIB. You can sign up there and get started today chatting. Again, we broadcast live every Friday, 1 p.m. East. You can catch on gfqlive.tv. And, of course, we're going to have the archive on iTunes, on Zune, Windows Phone, everywhere podcasts are available. We're going to have it there. And we'll see you all next week, guys. Take care, and we'll see you next time.